us today. Before we get rolling today, I want to send a special shout out again and thank Final Forms for their sponsorship of both WSSAAA and WIAA. Again, we have some people that are close to home, and Stark Porter and Steve Frucci, who are some of the resources that we have to lean on for those either using Final Forms in this state. But on top of that, Clay Burnett is an outstanding human being, and will take care of any of us who decide to switch over and go with Final Forms. So thanks to their sponsorship to both organizations. We got Coyte Cooper here. He's many of you probably saw him last year at our WSSAAA conference. Maybe read a couple of his books. Outstanding energy giver and best-selling author, international speaker, and high-performance coach, who is one of the premier experts in the area of leadership and maximizing human potential. A former Division I NCAA All-American, TEDx speaker, college professor, and the CEO of Earn the Right Incorporated. Dr. Cooper has worked closely with thousands of proactive professionals the past few years to develop a unique transformational system that helps audience members radically enhance their clarity, focus, energy, and motivation and passion on a consistent daily basis. As an athlete, he's an outstanding wrestler, 3 times high school national champ, 3 times world team member, and 3 times Washington high school state champ. Really excited to have Coyte on today. Coyte, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you take it away?
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me. And, you know, it's interesting, at the end, you add those athletic accomplishments, and it's been so long ago. It was such a pivotal time in my life, but it's been so long ago. And it's so interesting when you move back to Washington, how many people kind of still see you as that. And I guess it just shows the power of sport, man. Just, you know, people love sport in this area. And I'm excited to be here and get a chance to visit with you. I'm doing a lot more of this. My speaking business kind of got turned upside down. But I'm doing a lot more of these types of talks, and it's really neat in that it's allowing me to connect more with different people. And I'll say this, man, you guys really turned it out. This is a great group, man. I've been on a bunch of these, and this is one of the biggest groups I've been on. So just grateful for your attention, your time, you being here as a leader to get better. And with that being said, what I wanted to do is I'm going to pop up a presentation I'm going to do for you, and it's and I'll talk to you about in just a second. But I'm going to ask for those of you who, as soon as I pop it up, if you can see it, just let me know that you can see it, so we know that we're seeing the same things, and I'll go ahead and get going. So go ahead and Cole, if you see that, I can see you for sure. Can you see it on the screen? Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up so I can see more of you real quick. You don't see what I'm seeing, but this will allow me to kind of see more of you and get this thing going. So this is what I call the Thrive Essentials. And I think there's one of you for sure on here, Colin. I've had a chance to work a little more with Colin, so he's familiar with this. But the rest of you, I think this is new. And some of you have heard me talk about the idea of flipping the script, and that's something that I really, really believe in. But one of the things that people have really gravitated towards in these times, and they've asked me to do, is say, hey, can you come on and talk about, we're in some really unique times. Like, can you help us find ways to get our bearings? You know, because there's just a lot being thrown at us. And so I decided to create this. It's called Thrive Essentials. And essentially what this is it's 4 essentials to thrive in uncertain times. Because in reality, I mean, we've never faced anything like this, and it's crazy. And so what I wanted to do is just come on and tell you 4 things that you can do to get your bearings, to get stronger as a leader. Because one of the things that I truly believe, and I think there's probably a big chunk of you that do as well, these challenging times are the ones that really help you carve out and get stronger. And the fascinating thing is when I think back, where did my reference point come from? It came from athletics. It was the moments where I struggled and I got knocked down and I was questioning myself and I maybe wanted to give up, that I learned from really amazing coaches to stand up and to move forward and really charge forward. And it was in the middle of those that I learned the most life-altering lessons and that I got stronger. And so my message is going to come from that spot, and that challenging you, if you don't already, to see this as an opportunity to get stronger, to make your school stronger, you as a leader to show up stronger. And for those of you who have heard kind of heard me speak before, I have a story behind this. And for those of you who have heard it, just bear with me. Hopefully I'll tell it in a way that you'll enjoy it even more this time. For those of you who haven't, I think it will help you to understand the reason why I think this message and the things I've learned are ideal. I mean, perfect for this time in terms of helping people thrive. This is the University of North Carolina. And I had a chance at the age of 28 to land what I considered a dream job. I was an assistant professor in sport management in the area of sport administration. And I had been at Bowling Green State University. I'd been at West Virginia University. And when a job came up at the University of North Carolina, man, it was a place that I always imagined potentially going. And I landed that job. And I went on campus and I walked around, man, I feel like I had to pinch myself. The campus is just absolutely gorgeous. It's a top 10 public institution, one of the best colleges in the United States. And on top of that, to boot, when you're an assistant professor in sport administration and you want to create leaders, like what an amazing place to do it. We had a chance to work with their athletic department, get to know their AD, all of their senior administration, work with their sports programs, like all of it. It was really, really special. And when I went in there though, I met with my boss, and at the time his name was Kevin Guskiewicz. And Kevin Guskiewicz has done so well at his job. He is now the chancellor of the University of North Carolina. He runs the University of North Carolina. That's how well he's done. And he was a very proactive leader. And we sat down in one of the very first meetings. He said to me, Coyte, we're going to ask you to do some things that we've never asked anybody to do, in particular in your area. He said, we're going to ask you to publish 3 or 4 articles a year. And for those of you who aren't familiar, that's a lot of articles. That's a lot of work. And he said, we're going to want you to pour into your teaching because we value teaching here. We want you to show up and really impact our students. And he talked about also grant funding. You're going to need to get grant funding. And so he basically laid out all of it. And my background as an athlete was this, man, I was going to attack that. And, I created that plan and I looked at it and I said, man, I'm going to do everything in my power to leave no doubt. I'm going to go out and I'm going to double up publications. I'm going to just pour into it. And the reason why I decided that is because when you're a tenure line professor, you've got this time period, and the time period is 6 years. And essentially in a 6-year period, you got to go out and you really got to put your best foot forward. You've got to try to overachieve in the areas that they've talked to you about, because in year 6, all your materials go up and and a bunch of people evaluate them and they decide whether or not to say yes or no to tenure. For those of you who know what that means, a yes means stability, promotion. For me, it was like I hit a goal and I get to stay at the University of North Carolina, which is what I wanted to do. If you don't, it means you lost your job, you're fired. So there's a lot at stake there. And so I went in there and I just got to work and I started to publish 7 or 8 articles a year. I really worked hard on my teaching and started to get grant funding. I did all the things they asked me to do. Year 1 comes around and I met with Kevin, and Kevin said, Coyte, like, you couldn't do anything else. You did everything we asked you to do and more. I even had a letter for it. And he said, just keep doing what you're doing. And man, when you get that type of feedback, that's a good feeling. Like, I was excited about that. That meant I was on track. I mean, I valued being there. So I just kept working. Year 2 came around. Kevin said the same exact thing. Year 3 comes around and they get more serious. You see, you take more of your materials and you put it out, and everybody in your department that is ranked above you looks at that. So this is going to be a group of 14 to 15 people that are going to look at this. And I can tell you right now, academia is one of the most critical environments I've ever been in my life. So it's a hard place to please. But I put all my materials up and the feedback came back, and it's unanimous, was saying, just move, he can move forward. He's done everything we've asked him to do. He's in good shape. So year 4 or 5 came and I had a new chair, new boss, but I had those same 1-year meetings and they said, keep doing what you're doing. Same thing. So anyways, year 6 comes, and this is the big year. This is the year where you take everything you've worked on, your articles, your books, your teaching philosophy, research philosophy, service philosophy, this big old pile of stuff. It's insane. It takes you like a month to put it together, and you take it and you push it out, and it's no longer your thing. And now what's going to happen at this point is it's going to go to a lot of people in the university, and they're going to judge you. It's going to go to people outside the university, and they're going to judge you. And they're all going to determine whether or not that your work that you've done, that you've poured into, is enough for that university. So anyways, I put it in October, and it's a long process. I was told, don't expect it anytime soon. It's an April thing. So you're sitting there kind of doing your thing, doing your job, pretending like you're good, you know, that you're okay with it taking this long, but in reality, you're really kind of going, man, I hope this goes well. I've heard horror stories about tenure, but I always thought, no, I've done everything they've asked me to do. I'm good. So anyways, April comes around. And I don't hear anything. And I asked my boss, like, what does this mean? And he said, oh, don't worry about it. Like, you know, they're a little backed up. I've checked on it. Coyte, at this point, I heard him say at one point, it's like a red rubber stamp, because here's what I'd gotten up to that point. My department had voted 14-0 for me to be tenured. My chair had unanimously supported it. My senior associate dean and my dean of my college had supported it. My college and the committee in my college had supported it. I had all of the support all the way down, and it now went to one final committee of 8 different people who I'd never met in my life, scattered across the university, who were going to make a final decision on whether or not to do it. So I'd been told, man, it would be crazy for them to go against it, but you should be good. It goes an entire another month, and we're at graduation in May, and I still haven't found out. Now I'm getting a little bit more nervous, but I thought, no, I'm still good. And it's the Monday after graduation, and my boss says, Coyte, I want you to come in. I want to meet and talk to you. He said, I've got something I want to chat about. And I remember thinking in my mind, like, man, like this is the news. Like, I'm going to get the news, and man, we're going to hit that goal, and we're going to celebrate, and we're going to go buck wild as a family. And by buck wild, I mean Chuck E. Cheese. Like, that's our example of buck wild. It's not anything wild or anything like that, but we're going to have fun. And so anyways, I drive in, and it's a beautiful day, like just on this screen right here. And I go into my boss's office and I knock, and he's over sitting at his computer, and he stands up, he comes over, he says, Coyte, good to see you. He said, I've got something to chat about. And there was a conference table in between us, right? And he has an envelope in his hand, and he says, do you want to sit? And so I say, sure, let's sit. And I sit down, and he immediately kind of moves into it. He says, Coyte, he said, I want to thank you so much for everything you've done over the last 6 years. He said, you've been a valuable citizen to our department. You've done everything we've asked you to do, and we can't thank you enough. And I'm this energetic, passionate guy. So I cut in and I say, man, thank you so much. Like, I've loved being here. It's like, it's been a dream job for me. People have been so kind, and I love it. My family and I are so appreciative. And then I looked at him, and I realized that something had changed in his body language. And I'm guessing every one of you has been around somebody where you knew they were about to tell you something that you didn't want to hear. I wasn't prepared for this, but I looked at him and I sensed that something was wrong, and he immediately stopped, and he goes, Coyte, he said, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this. He said, but you've been denied tenure. And he slid the envelope forward. And I tell people, like, when you have big news, like getting fired from your dream job, and it turns your life upside down, your thoughts aren't even the first thing to respond. It's your emotions. And I tell people, the first thing I felt is like my stomach had dropped out from under me. I felt like my throat was tightening up, my face was flush. And then my thoughts caught up with me. And my first thought was this, like, what does this mean for my family? Like, what am I going to do? You know, because I had bought a house. We had built a house. I had my 2 kids there. We were planning on having a 3rd kid there. We were there, man. And that was my first thought. My second thought, I'll never forget, it was, am I damaged goods now? Like, am I going to be able to get a job somewhere else? Like, how am I going to explain this to another university? And I had a lot of different thoughts that came with that. But the next prominent thought I had was this: I want to get out of here. My boss was so kind, and he wanted to talk about a different job opportunity. It would have been a demotion, but it would have kept me there and paid me the same and things like that. But I didn't want to be there. And so I remember I got out of there, and I had one more thing I had to do. And I always imagined when the time came, when this day came, that I would be getting good news, and I'd be calling my wife and saying, we did it, we're here, we're good. And now I'm sitting here like, how do I tell my wife in a way that doesn't just like rock her world? Because like, I'm sitting here and I'm feeling all kinds of emotions, and I just don't want her to feel that way. And finally, I realized, I'm like, there's nothing I can do, man. She's going to feel this. Like, this is us potentially having to uproot our entire family, find a new job, going somewhere. We weren't planning on that. And then I proceeded to kind of butcher the phone call, because here's what I did. I hit the button. I called her up. She answers, and I give her no warning. She says, hey, she says, hello. I said, I didn't get it. And she's probably thinking, you didn't get what? Your lunch? What are we talking about, dude? And I said, I didn't get tenure. And I tell people, my wife is one of the sweetest Midwest girls you'll ever meet. She's so kind. She's so gentle. But man, I got to tell you, when you push a Midwest girl, even a sweet one, they got some fight in them. My wife was like, you've got to be kidding me. She's like, after everything you've done. And there was a lot of things I wouldn't say on here, like maybe in a little language, but she says, the last thing she says, what does this mean for our family? And I said, man, I don't know. But I said, I'm going to come home and we're going to figure it out. And I got off the phone and I went home that day. And in the weeks afterwards, I felt a wide range of things. The very first thing that I felt was like, I was confused. Like, how in the world do you get 5 years of positive feedback and even a 6th year of almost all unanimous feedback? And then it goes to one committee who, it wasn't even close. They voted 7-1 no. 7-1. How does that happen? Now, as a former athlete, I'm also a little bit feisty at times. And I also moved on. I was angry. I'm like I was mad. I'm like, what the heck? This is messed up. And then I've had other emotions, but the last one that I really settled on was a new one for me. Now, I don't even think I knew what it was at the time, but I was watching a talk by Brene Brown, watching her TED Talk, where she talked about the feeling that you get when you're disconnected and you feel like you're not enough. She said it's shame. And I remember that's what I felt, man. It wasn't fun. You're going into work, and all of my colleagues, all of my students were so kind about it. But man, I felt like I just didn't belong there anymore. And I felt like I wasn't enough in a way. Okay. Now I'm going to stop right there, because I didn't come here actually to make you feel bad for me. Some of you are sitting back there who haven't heard it. You're going, man, that stinks, man. I feel bad for this guy. I didn't come to do that. And by the way, I mean, and the reason I tell people, a lot of times you feel that way is you're not only kind and you have empathy, but you've been there before. You've been rejected. You know what it feels like to fall short. You know what it feels like to not feel like you're not enough. Everybody's experienced it. That's what I've learned. It's a universal thing that everybody feels at some point. But I didn't come for that reason. I came because after I had moved through these emotions, and after a few weeks where I had reminded myself over and over that I was no longer a professor at a top university, and after those, because that, you know what happens when you do that? It leads to the wrong emotions, right? I finally did something about it. And in the middle of chaos, uncertainty, first off, we made a decision that we weren't going to take the other job because it was going to be something that I just didn't want to be there. And so we decided we're going to move away. So combine all this craziness of self-doubt, frustration, negative thoughts with going out and pursuing a new job as an entrepreneur, an author, coach, and speaker with literally no coaching, no speaking, nothing. And there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of challenges, a lot of not knowing. And then, so I had all those challenges. In the middle of that craziness, I just started to establish single habits. Single habits at the time that I had no idea would create an unbelievably profound change in my life. And those led me to other habits. And I tell people in a span of about 2 years, I went from dwelling on disappointment, struggling, to really, truly thriving in my life. And what I do now is I'm so passionate about that process because it led me to a place where I'm happy every single day. I'm not walking around. I don't feel stress. I don't feel anxiety. And there's a lot of that I could be doing with, but I'm happy and I'm excited and I'm passionate and I'm showing up the best that I can because of the system that I've put in place. So what I want to do today is share some of those, and this will be new. Even if you've seen me talk, some of these are going to be absolutely brand new. You'll have never seen some of these things. And so that will be really cool. But before we do that, I have a couple more things that I want to do, because the truth is I learned some powerful lessons in the middle of my journey. And one of the most powerful things I learned, number one, was this: single habits. If you implement them and you're consistent with them, you pick some of the most some of those powerful habits on the planet and you stick to them, they can literally rewire and transform your brain. They can transform your results, and they can transform your overall quality of life, no matter where you're at. If you point your brain in the right direction, you can get better thoughts, better emotions, better results in your life. That's the number one thing that I learned that was crazy profound. The number two thing is the right structure is so critical to this. Meaning if you can take and you can put the right structure in place, man, it is so huge for you to be able to create change in terms of both speed and impact. Meaning if you don't have the right approach to doing something, you can have the right habit, but if you don't know how to approach it the right way, you're always going to struggle. And that's one of the things I help people with. And then the last thing is this: it's just the incredible inner potential that we have within us if we access it. And listen, I had some unbelievable coaches that taught me the power of belief and pulling out my potential. But man, I never really fully grasped until this journey the ability that we have to take control of where we're pointing our brain and what we're focusing on and how we're focusing. Because when you do that, your life can be vibrant. You can be a stronger leader. You can eliminate the stress and the anxiety, and you can start showing up the best that you can. So those are three of the lessons that I learned, hoping that will set the tone and get you excited for today's lesson. So we're going to talk about 4 essentials today. And what I want to do real quick is I want to pop those things up on the screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through those things. So don't feel like you have to go crazy on this. And another thing too is if you're a note-taking person, go crazy taking notes if that's your thing. But if you're sitting here taking notes, trying to keep track of what's on the screens and you don't love that, don't do that, because I'll send the notes over so you can have those things. What I would recommend is that you listen to what we're saying here so you can supplement those notes and really, really hit home with those things. The number one thing, though, that I talk to people about now is you got to change the way you see challenging situations. That's essential number one. Meaning if you walk around and you see everything that's going on around us as half empty or as frustrating or as a challenge, then you're going to continue to struggle. And it's in the middle of our ability to see things differently that will really make the biggest impact. So that's the number one thing we're going to talk about. The number two thing we're going to talk about is creating an NTT personal charging station. I promise I'll tell you what the NTT is if you don't remember, if you haven't read the book. But one of the most important things that I did in my journey is I started to show up and I started to invest in habits that charged me up, that got my clarity stronger, that improved my focus, that made me better when I showed up in my day. Because the thing I know about leaders is you are constantly pouring into others. Every single day, your job is to find ways to make everybody else better. And if you're not showing up for you, you end up worn out at some point. You end up frustrated. And guess what? When your energy levels go low, you can't be more effective. You end up responding in ways you don't want to respond. You don't have the energy to show up the way you want to show up. And that's frustrating for leaders. This number two, man, if you just took one thing and it was this would probably lead you to the other four we're going to talk about. But I think it's important to lead with the number one we talked about. And then the number three thing is you've got to embrace environments that empower, exactly like you're doing right now. Because what's happening is all around us, there's kind of craziness in that there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of that. And I'm not saying you don't have to deal with that in your jobs, but if you're going to be dealing with that in your jobs, you have to understand that if you don't have a place that will empower you or charge you, you're going to end up, that's going to rub off on you. And at some point you end up worn down. And there's a fourth, but it's a surprise. I can't tell you all of them. You just have to stick around for it. So we're going to leave a little bit of suspense there. Hopefully it's a little bit of suspense for you. I don't know. I just might be acting crazy or something like that. Nobody will be excited for it. Hopefully that's not the case. Okay. So the number one thing is, before we do that, I always tell audiences this, hopefully with that story up front, you go, yeah, he probably gets that, man. When you get put in a spot where you don't know how to support your family and you don't have a job and you don't have, there's a lot that comes with that. And so all of you, I think, will think, yeah, he probably understands that. But before we do, here are all the things that I've dealt with and I see that leaders and proactive professionals deal with on a regular basis. The number one thing is that the challenge of technology. Technology is one of the most, it's a wonderful thing. We wouldn't be visiting right now if it wasn't for technology. I couldn't create my courses and my masterminds and my coaching that I'm doing right now without technology. I would probably be just kind of stuck here, just hoping to gear up for the time when it freed up, but we can do this. And that's a wonderful thing. But technology is also, I believe, one of the biggest things that are causing people to struggle right now. And I was reading a book the other day about sales and marketing. And it's about this, he's kind of in the area of psychology, but he talked about, and it was crazy because he was talking about the study was on suicide. But he said, when suicides get put on the front page of a newspaper, a few things spike. We would expect okay, when you put it on the front page, suicides are going to spike. There's no question. We would think that makes sense. But you know what else spikes? Car wrecks and plane accidents. It's crazy. I thought, what in the world? And the thing is, if a single person committed suicide and there's no other intentional act, it's single car crashes that elevate, or single plane crashes. It's insanity. But the thing is that I wanted to take from that is, if that's happening with suicide, imagine when all of the things that we're hearing right now with the media, which is wired to create fear because fear sells to you. Well, if we're reading about anxiety and all the things that are happening that are bad, that rubs off as well. And so technology is one of those big challenges. It also fragments our attention a lot, but I won't get into that too much right now. The number two thing is distractions. That's another thing. Man, we feel so distracted. Not only do we have all this stuff going on, but that technology adds to that. And so I'm just going to pop some of these things up. Negative thoughts, they're about as high as they've ever been. And it's a big challenge for people. And I get it. All of these things not only have impacted me, but still at times when I'm not disciplined, still impact me. Another one is self-discipline. It's hard. Your jobs have been, you're now at home, and that's an entirely different level of job. I'm guessing you're used to being in front of people and and having the kids there and having colleagues there and having that be your norm. And then you got to go home and there's, you know, you got to deal with being self-disciplined on a daily basis. And even when you're at work, that's a challenging thing. And so just a couple more, I'll speed this up so we can get to the lessons. There's also self-doubt and there's fear. And it's interesting, but those are the number one and the number two things that people bring up. When I travel around the United States doing keynote talks and I say, hey, what's the biggest thing stopping you or other people from getting what they want? It's inevitable. It's a 1-2 thing. People, you know, grown people, it can be people in grief groups who are 85. It can be kids who are middle school students, high school students. It's fear of failure. That's the number one thing that people bring up. And number two, which probably could be close to number one, it's a close cousin, but it's self-doubt. The self-doubt that people have from past. And so I bring all those things up because not only, well, the things I'm teaching you teach you to be a stronger leader in a lot of different ways, but it'll help you flip the script on these things as well. So hopefully we've given you enough things to really focus on. The last thing I want to say is because on the other side of all of the challenges that these things represent is an opportunity. And I just want to make sure that when you're looking at this, you see a massive opportunity to create change in your life right now. And so what I want to do now is move into those different challenges or different essentials. So essential number one, and this is, I think it's one of my favorite things to talk about right now, is changing the way you see challenges. And I really pay attention to this stuff. And I watched as soon as the COVID stuff started to break. Like, I want to preface by saying, I know all this is challenging. I'd never choose it. It's in no way, shape, or form is it a good thing. I'm not saying that at all. But the moment that it came down, what media does is it pushes all of it out and we start consuming. But I watched so many people that when all of a sudden it happened, they're posting about being overwhelmed, how much it's too much. And I'm not saying there's not challenges, but immediately people were looking and they were seeing all the burdens, all the challenges that were in the middle of this in a bad way, that it was really hurting them. You see, the reality is when it comes to challenge, there are two ways that you can always see things. The number one way you can see it is we talked about as a burden. Even on the back end of this, you're going to continue to face challenges. And if you're not careful, what will happen is you'll see them as a burden. Your schedule comes up, I really got a busy schedule. Oh man, I got so much on my plate. When you have thoughts like that, the emotions that usually follow are anxiety, frustration, overwhelm, and those things will never pull out your potential. You see, the coolest thing is there's another side to this. Before, when I was going through my challenge at the beginning, I saw it all as a burden. I didn't like the fact that I'd been fired. I was overwhelmed by it. I didn't know how I was going to figure out how to move forward and support my family. The problem was I was seeing only burden. I was never looking in the middle of it and seeing that there could be something really cool in the middle of this. And so what I challenge you to do is, if you want to create change, the number one thing that you have to do is to look at this thing and just make a commitment, say, I'm going to do everything in my power to stop looking for burden, and I'm going to look for blessing. And the reason I tell you this is you may have all kinds of challenges, but if you see it that way, there's in no way, shape, or form are you ever going to be able to move forward and elevate as a leader. And so this is the key thing. The blessing is just you developing the ability to look at this and saying, what could be good about this? You know, what could I develop? Could I create stronger relationships with my family? Could I step back and create a leadership program for my athletes and coaches? Like, what could come out of this and become really extraordinary? And I'll say one more thing before I tell you how to do this. It's this. I was reading the other day a book by Ryan Holiday, and he talked about how half of the Fortune 500 companies in our country, some of the best companies in the world, were formed in bear markets and recessions. They were formed in the middle of adversity. He said Costco was formed in the middle of an environment like that. And here they are now thriving in the middle of this situation because they were formed in the middle of challenging times. So that's just to inspire you and to remind you of that. But here's a couple more things that I wanted to say. Here's basically when you break it down and you take and you look at this situation and other challenges and you go, man, I didn't choose it. I don't want it. It's a bummer. Your brain sees that as pain. And the thing is about your brain doesn't like pain. And so when those things come up and you see it the wrong way, your brain will actually try to avoid that at all costs, which is why we all of a sudden get distracted. We're on social media and we're doing some of the wrong things, is because we don't want that thing. The moment you take the same exact situation that you were seeing as a burden and you train your brain instead to look for opportunity, all of a sudden it can start looking like pleasure. And when it's something that looks like that, your brain will move towards it and you can be way more efficient. I told you before, in the weeks after getting fired, you know what I did? I mean, I was dwelling on it and I didn't like it. And then I stumbled upon this habit. It was, I don't know if it was a month afterwards, and I was reading and I learned about the power of gratitude. And the first thing I did that created unbelievable change is I just started to write down 3 things I was grateful for every single day. I call these things my blessed bank now. I take 3 things that I have in my life that I'm really grateful for and that I should feel blessed for. And I get up every day and I challenge myself to feel those things, to experience those things, to really be excited and grateful for those things. So that's the first thing I did. The second thing I did, though, is I added this step. And this was one of the most critical, coolest habits that I've ever formed in my life. And what it's called what's the gift? And here's how I came to that. I was still dwelling on the fact that I lost my job. And I was reading about this, about a guy named Viktor Frankl who had lost his entire family in a concentration camp. And he got out of the camp and he went out and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning that's impacted 40 million plus people. And I looked at that and I thought, oh my gosh, like here's a guy who faced things that I am not even close to facing right now. And he went out and he took this biggest disappointment that you could never imagine and he turned it into a gift for mankind, for humankind. And I thought to myself, if he can do that, then I can do that here. So I got up every single day, and here was the second part. So I wrote down 3 things I was grateful for, and I added this piece. I took my biggest challenge, the thing I would never really choose, and I said, first I started with what could I be grateful for? And the first thing my brain thought was like, nothing, dummy. Like that was my brain's response was nothing, dummy. There's nothing good about getting fired. But the one thing about me is I'm a little bit stubborn, and I learned that from wrestling and athletics. I refused that answer because I knew there was a better answer. And I said, no, what could I be grateful for? And I kept asking every day. And eventually my brain started to go, maybe this is the chance to actually go out and do something maybe I wasn't bold enough to do. Maybe this is the opportunity to go out and become that author, coach, and speaker that I've wanted to become. And at first my brain's like, no, that's not it. No, no. And I kept pushing though. And eventually I started to believe that. And that single habit has led me to the most powerful changes in my life because it taught me in the middle of that challenge, it taught me to refuse to see burden and instead to look for a better option. You see, on the one side, I was never going to get what I wanted, but on the other side, when I started to look for opportunity, it radically transformed how I approached my new career. And that changed my life alone. The second thing that it did is it created a pattern, a habit in my brain. You see, the more you do that, the better your brain gets. And instead of looking for junk, it gets really good at looking for opportunity. And here's how I knew that it was happening. I'll tell you how. Because 7 weeks ago, when this thing broke and it came down and the COVID thing was breaking and everybody started canceling things, in a 2-day span, I had 2 talks of $5,000 that were canceled in 2 days. Within 2 weeks, $25,000 to $30,000 of business was gone. Nothing there to replace it. And you know what my brain could have done if I hadn't trained it to look for blessing and opportunity? It could have sat there and said, this is too much. I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. This shouldn't have happened to me. But I didn't do that almost immediately because I trained my brain years earlier to do this and I practiced it every single morning. My brain immediately said, what's the gift? And immediately I knew, I said, what it is I get to create these training opportunities for people. I get to create these mastermind courses I've wanted to create. I get to create these coaching opportunities I've wanted to create. And now I'm doing that. And I'm working with people in mastermind groups and I'm coaching people and I love it. But I couldn't have done that without that. So if you really want to create change, just commit to saying, we probably will be out of this for, it's a good chance, a couple more months, certainly in your jobs. Take the next 2 months and say, I'll get up every single morning and I'll write down 3 things I'm grateful for. And I will take the biggest challenge I'm facing and I'll ask that question and I'll ask it until I respond. It will radically transform how you approach everything. The second thing I wanted to talk about is creating an NTT personal charging station. This was so powerful for me. Because this was actually the very first thing that I did. When I was struggling afterwards, after I'd lost my job and I was kind of sitting there, I remember I was sitting and I wish it would have came on something else, but it didn't. I was on social media scrolling and I came upon a video from a guy named Robin Sharma. And Robin Sharma is a guy who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, is one of his books, Leader Without a Title. He's really cool. He works with sports teams, Fortune 500 companies. And he was talking about the importance of rising early and reading the right books. I call it R&R now, rise and read. And he said, man, if you'll just get up every morning at 5 a.m. and you'll just read the right books, he said, it will radically transform your life. And I remember sitting there like going, I don't really love where I'm at now. I don't even like where I'm at right now. And I'm struggling. And I said, I'll get up every day at 5 a.m. So I've just made that commitment. And at first it was hard. I started to get up every single morning. And I would get to 3 p.m. in the afternoon and I'd be playing with my son on the carpet and my dog would be there and I'd fall asleep on the carpet. My wife was like, you better get your butt up. Like, you could get up at 5 a.m. You need to handle your business. You need to, my wife is a sweetie, but she was like, you need to get up and finish your day. But after about a few weeks, I started to get used to it. But you know what I started to do every single morning? This is unbelievably powerful. When I got up every single morning, here's the NTT part. It's no technology time. A pocket where there's no technology at all. That's NTT. That is one of the most powerful things that I teach right now. If you can wake up in the morning, and you might use your alarm on here, but you can put this off to the side and leave it and go to a space where you invest in yourself without technology. It is absolutely transformational. That's what I did. I stopped using my phone. I went down to my office and I started to grab these amazing books. And what happened is every single day, what I was doing is instead of immediately pointing my brain to the stuff on social media where it's negative or there's comparing, which is, by the way, what so many young kids are doing and why they're struggling, is their pattern. The very first thing they do is they wake up and they're flooding their brain with negativity and comparing. But man, if you can just create an interrupt there and push that off to the side, and you might say, Coyte, I don't do that. I just check my email. Well, listen, I get that you have to check your email, but how do you feel when the first thing you do is wake up at 6 a.m. and you look on and you have 50 or 70 or 80 emails to respond to? Probably not great. And I'm not telling you to avoid your emails. I'm saying don't make it the first thing that you do. Or if you say, I watch the news, that's even worse. The news is just littered with all kinds of crazy stuff. And if you want to watch it in a pocket, but absolutely unequivocally, don't let it be the first thing that you do in the morning. Because what you do the first thing in the morning is what sets the tone. It teaches your brain what's important. It teaches your brain what to look for. And if you'll instead get up and point it to positive, it's so transformational. And here's a few things. Number one, you can do gratitude right off the bat. And if you can just redirect your brain with the 3x1 Bless Bank I just told you about, it's so cool. But here's some of the other things that you can do. And the biggest thing is learn to point your brain to positive, number one. Get up and flood your brain with the right books. You can read the right books. You can do gratitude. You can revisit your goals that you have as an athletic director, but rather than pointing to negative, intentionally tell your brain what's most important. I have a good friend who's a leadership expert and he's a pastor. His name is Ken Hubbard. And he talks about the law of first, meaning the very first thing that you do is what sets the tone. Do you know where I actually learned the most about this concept? It was as an athlete. When I was an athlete, man, do you know what the best coach that I ever had did? And if you all get this, you'd say, when we were going to big competitions, he taught me to have an amazing warm-up that I could go through that would get me ready to thrive in state championship matches, in national championship matches. When I was in the finals of world team trials, I had a set warm-up that got my body ready, that got my mind ready, that got my heart ready. Why? Because when I stepped out on the mat, I wanted to be the best I could possibly be. And he taught me how to do that. You know, the fascinating thing is, I did that and other people do that in athletics. And I say, we should do that. You should learn to do that as an athlete. But you know, the fascinating thing is, for me especially, I right now and 5 years ago had things that were way more important than any state or national championship. And I was just strolling into my day. I was hitting the snooze button. I was jumping on my phone. I was getting into the shower and the shower was nice and warm. So I stayed in there too long, and I'm not against that. I like to take warm showers even now, but I was doing all those things. And then I was rushed to get my meal and I was hurrying to work, and it was all just a lot. And I had anxiety and I had frustration. And then I stopped. I realized that, man, I needed to go back to being like an athlete. I needed to get up every single day and do a warm up for my day. I needed to get my mind right. I needed to get ready for the things. And this is the way that you do that. If you'll just get up and use this time and say, I'm going to get up every single day. I'm going to spend 10 minutes to read the right books. And I can give you a list of books to read if you want that. And I'm going to do gratitude, and I'm going to do my goals. You could do that, and it could be 15 minutes of your day. And a lot of times people say, well, I just don't have 15 minutes, Coyte. A lot of times I say, if you'll just let me see your phone and let me see the use on your phone or what you're doing in your day, we'll see hours and hours. I actually look, when I think about kids, young kids, I've looked at this, I've studied this. A lot of young kids, 9 to 10 hours of technology use, social media, video games, some of them 14 hours, 14, 15 hours every single day. And then we're surprised that we get the outcomes that we do. And this is one of the things that I even teach young kids is wake up every single morning and create that type of change in your life by just pointing your brain to positive. So that NTT personal charging station is just, it's time for you. And you have to decide whether or not you're willing to fight for that. If you do, it'll create some really cool change. So the number 3 thing that I wanted to talk about, and these will go quicker now, is embracing environments that empower. And I tell people, one of the first things I studied this. I know this. I know that I need to be careful with how I use social media and I use technology. But immediately when this COVID thing broke, I found myself scrolling social media more than I have in years. And I would just be on there looking, wanting to know what's going on, like what's next. And when you actually think about it, it makes sense why we do that, because there's a mechanism in your brain. What part of it's called the amygdala. Its job is to look around and to look for things that are harmful. And when something like this breaks, your brain wants to know to make sure that it keeps you safe. But the problem is, in this instance, when we consume that information, all of a sudden, when we see that all the time, we have anxiety, we have fear, it's going to rub off on us. So the way that you counteract that is you pay attention and you put yourself into environments that are going to pull you up. The number 1 thing that I wanted to talk about is entertainment. It's a big thing. And you should do things that you enjoy. But if every day there's too much scrolling, or every day we're jumping on Netflix and it's the Tiger King and all those things, which I did for a few episodes and I realized I couldn't do anymore. And I'm not judging. I've watched some crazy shows in my life, but when you constantly have everything that's going on around you, and then on social media or on the news too much, and you combine that with television that's negative, that's a challenge. And even at the end of your day, pay attention to the last things that you're doing. Because if you're watching Tiger King and that's the last thing that goes into your brain when you go to bed, that's what your subconscious brain is likely digesting, or it's at least dictating the pace. So one of the biggest things you can do is to pay attention to your entertainment. What shows are you watching? How are you using technology? And if you'll just be more intentional there, it's huge. But put yourself into environments that empower. The number 2 thing, and many of you who are readers have heard this, you will likely become the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. That's why I always tell people, man, I work really hard to make sure that things are right in my family and my kids are growing up the right way, because I want to be spending time with these amazing young kids. But it's totally true. If you're always spending time with the wrong people and you're never around the type of people that inspire you and pull you up, you're going to struggle. And you say, Coyte, I can't really spend time with people right now. Then you pay attention to what you're doing on things like this. My wife actually said something that was really powerful last night. She said, now is the perfect time to take assessment and stock of the people that we spend our spare time with. Because we've got this gap, right? We've already broken off and spent time. You can actually assess and look at all the people that you spend your time with. And you might look and go, you know what? I have these big goals as an athletic director, things I want to do. But man, I spent a lot of time with this friend and they usually try to talk me down or get me to drink 10, 12 beers or something like that. And they pulled me off track, right? You have to take the stock of that. Because what my wife was saying is that, man, if you pay attention to that and you come back and you instead intentionally put yourself around the right people, man, that's a transformational thing. And then the last one I think is really, really critical. Pay attention to your training. Pay attention to what you're doing. Get on these calls consistently and level up. If you're struggling, find a way to take a course or get in a mastermind or get around more people so you can elevate your skill sets. That's something I've done consistently since the situation happened at UNC. I've always leveled up. On the backside of me is probably 250 books that I've read since then. And I've probably spent $2,000 or more just on books. I've purchased courses. I've done all these things to continue to level up. Why? Because I know when I level up, it not only makes me better, it increases my ability to also attract more. So one thing I would highly recommend is during this time, if you want to level up, put yourself into environments where you can really thrive. And then the last one, which I think is critical for all of you right now, is shifting your focus and striving to serve daily. And I know I told you earlier, you're always pouring into people, but if you get your morning growth routine right and you get your mind right, one of the things that you could do is you could move into your day and you really can serve at a higher level. But again, it's always about how you see things. And this picture on the screen is a picture of when I did my TED Talk. And the reason I put it up there is I learned a really powerful lesson when I did my TED Talk, because you see, I do talks all the time and I love it. Like I really enjoy it. And I've gotten to where I don't feel nerves and I'm excited about those things. But when I went to do the TED Talk, a funny thing happened. I went in there and first off, TED Talks they're a little bit they're a little bit intense, okay? Because they're these short time pockets, which are really challenging. But they also, here's what they do. You go in and the day before, they have you do a rehearsal. Okay, that you're like, okay, well, that doesn't seem so bad. They not only have you do a rehearsal, they have you do it in front of the directors and all the speakers, and then they critique you. This is literally the day before. Like, that was like, that, I do a lot of talks, and that like makes you nervous. And so I remember I was one of the last people to go, and I got on stage for my practice, and my hands were kind of shaking, and I felt my knees were kind of shaking under me. And I'm like, this isn't normal. Like, I don't normally feel this way. I usually love this. And I got up on stage and I did the best that I could. Okay. Well, I got done, and I always do this. This is one thing I've made a habit of doing. And I recommend this if you struggle with this, or if you have emotions you don't want. But I always go home, and when I have an emotion I don't want, I'll always stop and go, what was I focused on that would get me this, or that would lead me to this? Okay. So I went home. It's a really powerful thing. If you actually believe like you have the power to control kind of your thoughts and your beliefs, this is transformational. I went home and I said, so the number one thing I said, what am I focusing on to get this? The number two question I ask is, what could I focus on to get the types of emotions that I want? And that, if you do that 1-2 thing consistently, your norm will become looking for the right things. So the number one thing I went, as I said, what am I focused on? And it didn't take me long to realize, like, I had turned this into more than what it was. I was looking at it, number one, and going, man, what if this changes everything for my family? And at the time, we were trying to make things work like financially. So I wasn't being like super selfish, but I was going, how do I make this? I was hoping it would just explode and just solve all my problems. I turned into this massive thing. The number two thing, I was focused too much on what it meant for me. I was looking at it and going, man, I really hope this explodes, so it makes it easier for me so I can threaten. And it's not like terrible, but when you're focused on one, you make something bigger than it is. But two, you're too focused on what the outcome is for you. It will almost always lead to anxiety. And so I thought, okay, I don't want that. I don't want anxiety tomorrow. I want to show up, and I want to be able to just present with joy. Like, I don't want to be able to do my thing. So I said, what could I focus on to get better, to get to the spot where I'm thriving? And it was almost like immediately I had my answer, because there were two different focal points that I had used a lot throughout my journey separately, but now I was ready to put them together. And what it was this: it was give and grow. And I'm telling you right now, this is so powerful. I talk about it in my new Flip the Script book. I talk about the concept of giving and growing, meaning in that situation, first, I'll tell you what I did. I immediately said, okay, give. How can I focus on giving more? And I thought, well, rather than focusing on what it meant for me, I can focus on just showing up and impacting somebody's life, impacting somebody in the audience lives who needs it. Somebody out there might be struggling. If I can help teach them about perspective and the power they have to create change, that's what I need to do. And so I just started to emphasize, just give, Coyte, just give. And so I just focused on that. The number two thing, which is so critical, is I was so focused on it being perfect and landing it just right so I could have it explode. And that was too much. Instead, I just said, grow. Just go out, lay it out on the line, and whether it's good or not, you're going to grow and get better from the situation. And you might be saying, that doesn't seem like a lot. It's unbelievably powerful. If you become a growth person and you look at everything in your life, the challenges, and you look at it as an opportunity to grow, what it is you can control that. Even if you underperform, you can always go back to the drawing table and you can get better. Man, I've interviewed some of the most effective athletes on the planet, and I see this consistently. They are so focused on growth every single day. And what it does is it frees them up fear-wise. Yes, they have big aspirations to be Olympic champs, world champs, and some of the people to build these world-class businesses or become one of the best ADs they can possibly be. But what they can control is how they approach every single day. And that's the way they close the gap. So I said, give and grow, man, give and grow. And I went out, and it felt so much better. I enjoyed the process. It was something it's something that served me ever since. So for you, if you're struggling, if you'll just focus on serving every single day, switch your focus and says, man, there's so much here. Guys, what if I can just serve one student, one colleague today? What if I can just, one thing that I can say to encourage them and inspire them? That will change the way you feel. A lot of times your anxieties can go away when you focus on giving. The two thing is everything you're facing, man, it's all new. There's so much. You got to look at it for an opportunity to grow. And that's a really, really powerful concept. So with that being said, those are 4 of the things. And this was, honestly, I tell people, I pop this up now for people. And I tell them it's kind of a weird, picture. Like, people are like, why would you put that picture of yourself on the screen? Well, here's why. This was the day I left UNC. Okay. This was the day that I walked away from it. And I remember wanting to I took this picture because at the time I wanted to go out and I wanted to thrive so I could look back and they would regret their decision. I'm not proud of that. Like, it's not something that's fun to admit that I wanted to go out and do it so I could rub it in their face, which was never going to happen anyways. But at the time, that's where I was at, right? But you know what? Now I look at this picture and it's so different now, because one of the things I look at it now and I go, I'm so grateful that this happened. Like, I look at it and I go, man, I actually hope UNC is better without me. I hope that they found somebody that's a great fit that helps the students and it's better. But on the flip side, I also love where I'm gone. You see, in the middle of my biggest challenge, I never would have chosen in a million years. I learned a process that was so powerful, a process where you have the ability to take control of the things in your life, where if you'll just step up and read the right books every single morning, you know, like I'm looking at the chat, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, John Gordon. If you'll grab these books and more, and you'll just get up every single morning, put your phone away and start reading the right books, it'll create unbelievable change. But here's the thing, can't do it like 4 days and then take 2 days off. You got to show up and make it a lifestyle. You got to make it a must. And as a leader, I would say, like, if you are a leader, you've got to constantly be pouring into you, getting your mind right, your creativity right. This is the spot to do it. And that's what I learned how to do. I learned how to take gratitude and see things entirely different. I learned to put myself in the right environment. And the outcome is this, like, I get to do the things I'm doing and I love that, but happy every day, vibrant every day, passionate every day. And so what I want now is for you to be able to do the same thing. So I'm really hoping that this is useful for you. I definitely recommend you get on the chat right now and look at all the books that are being recommended and pick some of those things and make it your starting point. I'll also provide you a little bit of help in that I've got a free gift that I'm giving away right now. And what it is this, I'm actually giving away the audiobook of Flip the Script. So if you're in your day and you want to pop something on and use it, or you want to start with that in the morning, I definitely recommend, if you want a hard copy, going to Amazon and grabbing a copy. But if you'll go to flipthescripthabits.com, you can go on there. And this is a limited time offer, so it's not going to last. But if you go and grab that thing, you can listen to this thing. And it's essentially, if you really enjoy what we're talking about, this will really lay out some of the key components to doing this at a high level and effectively. And it'll also keep you in touch with other kind of resources that I have as well. So with that being said, thank you so much for your time. Here's my contact information. If I can do anything to help, there's my email on my website as well. You can find links to my podcast, my books, and things like that. And yes, that is my cell. I don't always put that up there, but if you have something you really want to ask me about, like, you can text me or call me or do anything like that. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks.
So thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Any questions that anybody has?
Hey, the first question that popped up though was, and you saw the list of books, but what is like the book or a few books that you just absolutely loved?
Yeah,
for the group.
It always change. That's always changing. One of the books that I love, and I think it's a can't miss, and hopefully nobody writes me and tells me that I'm wrong on this, but The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho is a really amazing book, a story book, in terms of just about vision and pursuing higher potential. I mentioned I love The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. I think that's a really, really good book. Also, one of the ones I just read that I love too is Dean Graziosi has a book. I think it's Millionaire Habits. It says it's about making millions, which is not what we want, but that's pretty incredible as well. But Cole, one thing I'll do, I have two lists. I have like a top 12 books I recommend. And I also have another list of like my top 10 from the last year. I'll send those things if you want those.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I had one quick question, Coyte, like just listening to kind of your morning routine. Would you give us kind of some details on what your morning routine and your evening routine look like as you get up and go to bed? Yeah.
And the first thing I want to say is, as I go through this thing, I want people to, I'll tell them about it, but I don't want them to go, oh my gosh, that's like too much. Like, I've built up to that. It's almost like athletes, when you're bringing them into the gym, you're not going to tell them to put 425 pounds on a squat rack and squat it off the bat. You're going to actually stack things. So what I do every single morning, some of the things that I do, I do a different order now. I wake up and the very first thing I do is I meditate for about 20 minutes. And But when I first started, I was started with 1 minute or 2 minutes. And so I meditate right off the bat. And then I have a routine where I go through, I've actually have a journal that I've created for this, where I go through and I'm going to go through like kind of my gratitude and my blessings. And then I go through like kind of just values, goals, and how every single day. So I basically write down who I want to be on a daily basis. Like as a leader, I recommend everybody in here, if you wanted to do one in addition to, you said, okay, I'm going to read and I'm going to do gratitude. I want to do one more values. Who do you want to be as a leader? You want to be passionate. You want to be inspiring, but write those things down. But then I write down goals and how. And then I also read every single morning. So what I would say if you're starting is just to pick 1 or 2, maybe 3. And if you only have 15, 20 minutes, just create your packet around there. So I do that every single morning. I also do some working out with my wife, but the end of the day is actually pretty simple. And I'm glad you asked that because it's really important that you bookend your days. The first thing you do and the last thing you do are really important. Wheels can come off in between, but if you keep controlling those 2 things, I think you'll eventually get control of the middle. The last thing I do is I end it with meditation. So I do about a 5-minute meditation and I'll put on a song of something that's relaxing or something that inspires me. And I will go through just some basic kind of attributes of things that I want to be emphasizing. So those values, man, being an energy person, being excited. I'll go through things like that in my vision just to end my day. And here's why it's critical. As a leader, if you really want to capitalize on something, studies have shown that when you sleep, your subconscious brain basically takes and works on things. Well, if you get really good at saying, okay, the last thing you're going to do is you're just going to breathe and focus on your vision for your athletic department or vision for your job, you'll basically take and you'll imprint that in. So your brain will work on that as you're sleeping. It sounds, some people might sound like crazy voodoo stuff, but it's not. It's what you put into your brain to do it. The biggest thing I think for you here, if you don't do this, just grab on to reading or gratitude or something like that in the morning and then end your day with just some breathing exercises. That it'd be so transformational. And what I always encourage people, I just want to tell you, like, if you go and you do it, you like, I did it for like 5 days, Coyte, and it didn't work. I always tell people, that's not what we're talking about here. It takes like up like 66 days to form a habit. People say 21. And what studies have shown is 21 is not quite accurate. It's not enough time for most people unless you're really good at habits. But if you're consistent for about a 2-month period, what will happen, and you do it the right way, there's a lot of things I could talk about here, but I'll just, if you're doing them, you're excited about doing them, you praise your progress, and you get to the point, what will happen is you'll form a neural pathway in your brain. That's essentially what a habit is. You create that pathway where it becomes second nature. The coolest thing about that is if you'll just read or do gratitude for 66 days, you might have to struggle and push yourself to do it at first. But if you praise it the right way, what's going to happen? After about two months, it's going to become second nature. When you take and you put some of the most powerful habits on the planet and make it second nature, they become chargers. You start your day with this energy level, and people say you only have a certain amount, but I think you can extend your energy tank. And so you start to do that, and it's really cool. And I'll say one more thing. We've done this with our kids. Like when I went through this process, I thought, I got to teach my kids how to do this. Like I need them to learn at like 5, 7, 6, 8, like how to do this stuff. But I thought, like, how do I do this? And I can't force them, right? And so my son at the time was using his iPad like a lot. And so I said, we got to get rid of this. We got to create change. And so I knew I couldn't just go and take the iPad away from him, because he would fight that. They would fight that. They wouldn't like it. So I went to him and I wanted to make it pleasurable. And I said, Carter, I said, what if we did like a 30-day challenge? No iPad, maybe we read or something like that. And he's like, immediately what you all would probably think. He said, well, what do I get? What do I get from that? That's generally what younger generations will say. They say, what do I get? And I said, buddy, what do you want? If we do 30 days, no iPad, and you get up and you read every single day. He said, what do you want? And he looked at me and he goes, trampoline park? And I'm like, buddy, you got it. Like in my mind, I'm going, he undershot big time. Like 30 days of no technology and 30 days of reading these powerful books. Like, and all he wants is that. I said, you got it, buddy. We'll go buck wild at the trampoline park. But I knew we needed to get him to 66 days. So I said, hey, what if we went 10 weeks? What do you want there? My man shot better this time. He said, Great Wolf Lodge. And I said, buddy, if you go 10 weeks of this, I said, we'll go to Great Wolf Lodge. Okay. So what I've done immediately is all of a sudden it's now his decision, right? He wants it. And so then all I did is I created structure. I gave him a habit tracker and my daughter a habit tracker, and they started tracking it. But they essentially went all the way through 66 days. This is where it ties back. I promise I was telling you for a reason. if you get it right, you don't always have to reward. You don't eventually it'll become something you really enjoy. My son now gets up every single day at 6 a.m. and he reads from anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. He reads anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour before he goes to sleep every single day. He's 8 years old and he loves it. And one of the reasons why is if you just do it for long enough, you'll find the pleasure in these things and it'll create change. And so if an 8-year-old can do this, I tell people other people can as well. Now, to be fair, 8-year-olds don't bring baggage, and in the right environment, they can crush habits. But just for all you, if you get to that point, it's second nature. And here's the coolest part. Once you get there, then you can start stacking other habits that will really create change. But sometimes you got to start with just 1 or 2 and then add those things. So sorry that was a long answer, Cole, but hopefully there's some value in that.
Hey, Coyte, this is BJ from WIAA. I wanted to chime in, ask you a question. As you were speaking, I so buy into what you're saying, and thank you for your message. Sometimes that life as an athletic director can be really lonely. You're the only one in your school. You're the only one in your district. And I think so many athletic directors really, they buy into and understand the power of educational-based athletics and the role that we play as ADs in kind of inspiring our coaches to do the right thing. But then kind of one of my experiences, and I'm assuming other ADs have felt the same way, is sometimes you bump into other people that are your bosses or the district office that they don't really share the same value set that you have. And it's really hard because you're kind of an isolated individual and you're kind of stuck in this building. And I'm just wondering what kind of advice you might have for ADs that are, sort of spinning their wheels or feeling like, they're kind of isolated in trying to really push forward or embrace those values with the people they work with.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's totally hard. Like I get this a lot with people who I work with. Really what I'm asking them to do is to step up and embrace a different type of lifestyle. And really when you do that, man, it can get lonely because you're doing things that nobody else wants to do. So the first thing I would say in terms of is if you got to carve out time, first off, if you can't find it with your leaders in your organization, you got to look around and you got to find those people inside your school who share it, or you need to look outside. So you find other ADs here who are committed to it. You can find a network of people right here who are committed to doing things differently. And you have people who are going to be more supportive of that. I think that is a really important thing too, is like, I think, just again, if you can start to put yourself into actual environments where you're around people. So again, if you can get in courses or masterminds where you meet similar people, you can create relationships, I think, for life. The last thing I would say, this is just spitballing some ideas, is stepping up and maybe creating, some places where you have some mentorship going on and you're challenging some of your coaches, your proactive coaches to step up and embrace this. So you have some people who understand what it means to show up and get up every morning. And I think that's so important. But the last thing I would say is this is something that I've had to do because my job, it seems like it's a lot of interaction, but it's actually a lot of by myself. I mean, especially right now, I have to get up, I have to do my thing. And so one of the things I've had to do is really embrace the fact that leaders who step up are different. They're just different. They choose a different lifestyle. And what you have to do is you have to change the way you see it. Like, don't look at it and go, oh gosh, it still feels lonely all the time. Instead, look at it and say, no, this is a path that I'm taking so I can really step up and create something special. And so you have to change the way you see all of that. I really take pride that I get up every single morning by 5 a.m. and I go through this routine and I get me ready to show up in my day. But I also combine that with pockets. My wife has gotten on board. She's done the things that I showed you before for over 600 days. My kids are now little habit people too as well. So I've got this really amazing environment that I've created. So sometimes you have to really work to create that around you as well. I don't feel like I'm alone because my wife is in it with me as well. So if you could just find somebody you're close with to embrace that, I think you don't have to, but you got to change the way you see it. Embrace being different, embrace taking that track. And then I'm not at all saying cut off human contact because that's not it. You got to find the right people and then spend intentional time with them, the ones who lift you up.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions for Coyte before we move on? Well, Coyte, if you don't mind, just one more time sharing your contact info for everybody, that would be awesome. Or maybe throw it in the chat so people have your email address and your phone number.
I'll do that.
That would be awesome.
As you're moving on, I'll put all that contact. I'll even put the email address of where they can get the ebook or the audiobook as well. Thanks
Perfect.
everybody. I really appreciate everybody's time, and just want to encourage you. I know that you have hard jobs. I know it does feel like it's alone, but you are people who can really make a difference. So really, keep showing up. And the best thing I can tell you is, it seems counterintuitive, but the best thing you can do to show up for other people, you got to show up for you first. I told my wife this, as a mom, she will literally starve before our kids get like a smidge hungry. And I had to tell my wife over and over, you've got to show up for you. The only way you're going to be the best you can for your kids when they wake up is doing that. So spend that time for you, get you right, get your energy levels right. So when you go into your day, you're ready for all that. So thanks everybody. Hope everybody has a great day.
Really appreciate it, Coyte. Thanks a ton, man.
Thanks.
All right. We have tentatively scheduled Jeff Lowell to talk about the gender identity piece and the committee through the WIAA. Jeff, are you on this call? I thought I saw your name earlier. There he is.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn it completely over to you. So anybody has any questions, throw them in the chat, and I'll monitor that chat for you, Jeff. But
thank you.
Take it away.
I'll start by showing Coyte what was on my table. This is actually one of the books that I taught when I was an English teacher, and something I carry around with me. It's definitely one that if you haven't read it, you should. The idea of habit and finding positive, and embracing being different. Those are three things that I just picked up from what Coyte was saying. And so one of the other things that I carry around with me all the time is the WIA handbook, and the fact that some see it as potentially this dry document. I look at it as something different, right? This is my embracing being different. I find the positives in that, and I'm going to use that as a way to kind of kick off what we're talking about with the gender identity bit. If you haven't really read the handbook, it's wouldn't be what I would call an exciting read, but it is definitely an important read. Because you have to get past the words to actually see the message there. And the message there is that we are an association of individuals, as BJ said, who have shared values. Those shared values really end up going into something that Coyte just brought up as well, and that is serving other people. And the people that we're serving are somewhere between 14 and 18 years old, and their families, and providing them with an opportunity to participate in something that every one of us says is a life-defining kind of an event for kids. So really thinking about that in terms of eligibility in this particular instance, and in talking about gender identity. Those of you who have sat on an eligibility committee, one of the first things you say to a family when they come in is that you're there to try and find eligibility, find a reason to create a path for somebody to be able to participate. And that's what this gender identity rule is. And so what I want to do is I'm going to give you just a real quick overview of the rule, where it came from, where we are right now, what our committee is doing, what we're kind of looking at, and then where we're going to go from here, just real quick, and then really open it up to talk to everybody about what they're experiencing across the state right now. So our rule 1815 in our rule book right now is about 10 years old. And it's actually something that we can actually be real proud of, because it was one of the first comprehensive rules in a state association handbook, and was a model for many other state associations. Those state associations, there are some that actually pretty much lifted our rule 1815 and just placed it into their handbook to use for their states. Really, as we've kind of dug into this rule over the last several months, what we've really come to realize is there haven't really been formal updates to this rule since it was passed. It's been implemented a few times. The last time it was implemented was this past fall. So we had to have a group jump in and follow the processes in 1815, to help a student find eligibility. And then if you guys have not seen it, and I believe it was something I sent out to everybody, but the WSSAAA mentors, so Jeff Peets and I end up putting out a monthly newsletter with the help of all of our WSSAAA mentors across all of our activity districts. And in the November of 2019 WSSAAA mentor newsletter, there was actually a guidance document that was linked. And that's something I'll circle back to, and I can end up showing you again. That guidance document ended up breaking down the rule, breaking down the appendix that has definitions as they're listed in our book right now, and then really gives the athletic director an opportunity to take a look at some scenarios and how that rule would be implemented. And what they can be doing is they end up seeing that human being across their desk who is looking for eligibility, and how they can help that kid find that. So our committee right now is actually a really diverse group: medical professionals, legal professionals, parents, kids, WI staff, Stacy Ward, Russ Waterman, and I believe I saw Russ's name, so I think Russ is on this call too. So we're all working with BJ and Justin and everybody else to try and make sure that we can come up with a rule right now that is actually fitting today's society. So in doing that, we're reviewing our current policy and our procedures. We're reviewing our current terminology, and really looking at trying to update our handbook to make sure that we are in line with what is today's, what is today's society, and how, how transgender legislation and court cases and how the transgender population across the country right now are actually being provided opportunities to participate, but also the language that's used to refer to students or to families or to other people. And then, so what we've done, we spent a lot of time reviewing that language, and what we've found is that our definitions that are in our book were woefully out of date, and we really needed to spend some time updating those. We spent a good deal of time reviewing state policies, and then spent a good deal of time reviewing national and state headlines as well. Many of you know that there is a case that if anybody is following transgender participation rules in the country right now, they're following that Connecticut case. Three students are suing the CIAC, the Connecticut Interscholastic Activities group, and I believe it's 2 transgender females, and that lawsuit was filed last fall. There's been articles throughout this school year. Last spring it was filed. I actually, if you've heard me talk about it before, I got to sit next to the athletic director of the school where those 2 transgender students attend at the national conference in December. Got a chance to talk to her directly about what that's been like, and how that really kind of drives her day on a daily basis. The latest article that I could find is that our Attorney General, the Attorney General has actually weighed in on that particular case also. The current closure has delayed some hearings, but that's something that's actually due to hit the courts sometime this spring. Based on that particular case, there's proposed state legislation that came this year as the state legislation was being introduced in Georgia, Idaho, Missouri, New Hampshire, Tennessee, and Washington all had proposed changes. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So 3 students is what I just got from somebody in the chat, and driven definitely by 1. So 3 students suing 2 students named in the lawsuit. Just to clarify that Connecticut case. But those state legislation proposals were really targeting the idea that an athlete's biological sex that was indicated on their original birth certificate would be the only way they could participate. And one of the ironic things about both the Connecticut case and the state legislation is that Title IX is actually being used as a potential arguing point to get those things passed. What I do know is that I haven't followed every one of the states, but I do know that the proposal in Washington didn't go very far in committee even this spring. What our committee is actually looking for outcome-wise, we're actually really spending. Like I said, we spent a lot of time updating vocabulary. There's the idea that there's some editorial changes that'll be able to go to the executive board in June, with the idea that our handbook can be updated through the editorial processes to bring it up to date. And then what we're really doing right now, between now and August, is trying to discuss with athletic directors to get an idea of what it is that we're dealing with in our schools across the state, and then really trying to gather information so that what we can do is inform what a potential amendment might look like in December of 2020 for voting during the 2021 Rep Assembly. That would be a proposal from our committee to the executive board. The executive board would then be the sponsors of that particular amendment. That is an overview, a real quick overview. What I did promise you, and I'm going to share my screen here. And what I'm going to do is show you, if I can find it. I had it open. Let me find my my guidance document. That's it. So let me share this with you if I can figure out. I've been using Microsoft Teams too much. This is it right here. So if you haven't seen this document, what I did with a number of rules and then talking to staff about this as well, and I can make it a little bigger so you guys can see, is just put together basically an interpretation of rules so that athletic directors across the state can apply them the same way. Every one of them looks somewhat similar. WI language up at the top. So this is just straight out of Rule 1815. And the other thing I did with this one is I pulled Appendix 6 where the gender identity definitions are. This is the area right now. Appendix 6 is the area right now that we're looking at editorial changes in June. Because these, as we said, these definitions are woefully out of date. And then I also added the core values. And I really, and this is kind of where I started this morning's talk with is, the idea of going back into the core values. These have also been edited by our committee and would be potentially an editorial change as well. This is the important part for you guys. How do you make sense of the rules? You can read them, you can read them, you can read them. And this is where I spend, this is a habit for me. I read these rules on a regular basis, sometimes 2-3 times a day, but how to make sense of them. And really what it boils down to is when you see a student in your office, you got to take a look at what's in your school's student information system. So the SIS is your student information system. And right now, the established gender of any athlete that comes to your office is based on what is listed in your student's profile in your student information system. So that established gender remains in place until the student asks to either participate on the team of the gender not listed in their information in their student information system, or the gender listed in their information has changed, one or the other. Okay, and so what this does is then go through, and I won't bore you with it, but anybody who wants it, we can get this sent out to you also. I can resend the November 19, I can send you just this document, not a big deal either way. But really what this does is end up breaking down what steps you would end up taking to make sure that kid was eligible, and then gives you one other example at the end of this as well. Okay, so like I said, real quick, and Mick, yeah, that is, Mick actually just shared that the Connecticut executive director ended up sending some information back this way about what Attorney General Barr's paper is saying. And there's specific language that's coming out of that, and this is what Idaho has done too. That really says no one can change their gender on their birth certificate, period. That is the, and without getting into politics of everything, that is one of the things that is going to be played out in court with these cases, and we'll see kind of where things go. So that is a real quick overview of where we're going, and really what I wanted to spend time talking to you guys about is what you're finding across your, across the state at your schools. What is it you're dealing with? What is it we can answer? And BJ's here, she's on the committee. Russ, Stacy, anybody else can pop in and end up helping answer these questions also. Just wanted to facilitate a chance for everybody to talk. They are tough conversations, and anytime anybody's asked me that question, what I advise people to start with is just remembering you have a human being across the table, and it's okay when you're talking to somebody to say, I'm just trying to gather some information to make sure you are eligible where you should be eligible, right? So I need to ask you some questions. And where I would start in that particular instance is I would go right into the student information system as well. So if the student comes to me and the student is saying they identify as female, but listed in the student information system is still male, that's where the conversation has to begin. That by this rule, what we have to do is we have to actually, get you registered for male sports. And if the student says, I'd rather participate in the female sport, well, then there's a couple of things that need to potentially happen. That conversation about, potentially changing the student information system, which may not be possible because mom and dad may not be supportive of it, of the student and where the student is identifying or how the student is identifying at that point. And they may not be comfortable talking to mom and dad, right? And then that puts us in a precarious position. And we would hopefully be able to encourage them to open that conversation with them. The other avenue then to talk about is, if it's not going to change in the student information system, that's potentially where this appeal process that's listed in the handbook could potentially be accessed as well, to end up giving them access in the gender that they identify with, even though it's listed differently than the student information system. Okay, so but the initial conversation is, this is the information that I have right now. Here's what the rule is. So it takes the emotion, takes any judgment out of it. And typically it's, my experiences, I've talked to a number of these students as well, is if we can start there, and what are we hoping to do is to find you a way to be eligible where you believe you should participate, then great. We can have a place to start the conversation, and typically students are going to respond pretty well to that. Any other questions? Any other situations that people have dealt with? While I'm waiting, people are thinking, and it's definitely a topic that is sensitive in nature, and I know there are many people that are hesitant to jump in with both feet and just start talking about it. One of the things I can share is that across the KingCo conference, there are a number of transgender students that are participating, and in a number of our schools, coaches have been afraid. Well, how am I going to deal with this? What am I going to end up having to do? How are kids going to react? And across our schools, and I'll get to your question in just a second, BJ, but across our schools, what we've found is that kids have typically responded in a much more inclusive, much more sensitive way than any adult would potentially give them credit for. And then what coaches have found is that it's not an issue at all, right? They treat the kid by calling him by their preferred pronouns, by calling him by their preferred name, treat him with respect like they would any other athlete, and things tend to work out the way they're supposed to. BJ asked if my document's available on the WSSAAA website. If you go to the toolbox and you end up searching for the WSSAAA mentor newsletters, and you click on that, you can find the November 19th one. You can see there's a box on the left-hand side of that particular newsletter that describes this document, and it's linked to that. So you can always find it that way. But like I said, I'm happy to send it to you individually. I've already gotten a couple emails this morning since I mentioned it, and I'll make sure I send it to those folks separately as well.
Hey, Jeff, one thing that I think is important to mention while we're talking about gender identity is it's not just the individuals and where they fit in participation. I think one of the things that I hope our whole state can continue to do is really just embracing just that sensitivity and cultural awareness, because the journey, I think, for those particular students, after meeting with a handful of them, it can be pretty challenging, but it seems like the students within their own school can be really accepting. But sometimes when they go to a competition where it's the other teams can be fairly mean towards that person. And so I would just encourage all of our ADs to, be spending time with their coaches and just really talking about that inclusivity piece and, what it means to interact with kids that are going through the gender identity. Because that's one of the things that I've gathered from some of the students that we've interacted with is kind of what it feels like when they are going to league competitions and some of those things.
Thank you, BJ. That's a very good point. You and I have both had the good fortune to come across and talk to a number of transgender students, and that is, I think every one of them I've spoken to, that has been their experience, at least at some point during their high school career, that they felt like their particular journey, their particular sense of identity was being minimized, was being dismissed. And what we can do, just as we heard earlier this morning, what we can continue to do is make sure that we embrace our own mission, we embrace our own philosophy, we embrace our own goals, and make sure that when we say all, we mean all, and end up continuing to create an environment that those kids can grow, end up sharing in these same kind of experiences as their classmates. And end up reaping the benefits of what we believe is probably one of the best things that they could become part of in high school.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time this morning.
My pleasure.
Can you throw your email in the chat so if people have questions, they can email you directly?
Sure, that is no problem. And then I think there were 6 or 7 other of the same. I have 6 or 7 other rules I've done the same kind of thing for, included them in these WSSAAA Mentor newsletters, out of season rules. Let me see, I can tell you exactly which ones they were. Classification, explanation, postseason participation, rule violation. So if you're interested in any of those as well, I can attach all of them at the same time and send them off to you. And then if there is a rule that you're interested in that you think would be beneficial to everybody to have it kind of broken down and analyzed and get an explanation to people, share that with me. This is one of my habits. It's actually one of the things I find joy in. That's how I embrace being different. I don't mind getting into the rule, breaking it down and putting that together for everybody. So I'm happy to do that.
Perfect. Does anybody else have any questions for Jeff? All right, you guys, it sounds like we're ready to wrap up this WSSAAA Wednesday. Next week, we're fortunate to have Dr. Ken Briggs, who's going to be discussing finding joy on the job while getting kicked in the face. Probably all been through some scenarios where we felt that way. Also going to have Andy Barnes from the WIAA discuss a few things and maybe not to put Mick on the spot, but Mick can talk about maybe a meeting that's coming up with superintendents regarding summer activities and things of that nature. So appreciate you guys all being here today. If you don't have any other questions, we can wrap this up, or you can get Jeff and Coyte's contact information through the chat, and we'll see you guys a week from today. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.